I'm Laurent Carbonneau. I'm the Director of Policy and Research here at CCI. Joining me today as well are Dr. Karen Cross and Adrian Schauer, who are the CEOs respectively of Mimosa Care and Mimosa Diagnostics, excuse me, and AlayaCare, great CCI companies. So just to give you folks a run through of what we'll be doing today, we'll be running through at a high level the sort of overflight of our new policy report, A Mandate to Innovate. And then we'll be having a discussion with myself and with Karen and Adrian. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end and look forward to all of that. So to set the stage here a little bit, as you're no doubt aware, we had a federal election in the very recent past, and we have a new government that'll be led by Prime Minister Mark Carney. That government will be taking shape next week when they announce a cabinet. And to kind of steal a march and set a little bit of the tone for what we're hoping to see, CCI just released a mandate to innovate, which is a pretty comprehensive set of recommendations across government for what the new government's innovation priorities should be, recognizing that the stakes are very high, and we'll get into that a little bit through the overflight. But we thought this was exactly the right time to get out there and put out a bold agenda for how we can really meet the moment at this time of quite profound disruption with the U.S. and with other trade partners. So I think we'll head right into it in that case. Gabby, if you want to call up the slideshow, we'll get started. So many of you will have heard this from me before, but innovation, if you look at the economic metrics, it really is the foundation for prosperity. And prosperity is really what underlines our security and our sovereignty in the 21st century. So you really cannot have a safe, secure, prosperous, and sovereign country if you don't have an innovative economy. What does an innovative economy look like? They're the ones that respond quickly to technological and economic disruption, that are able to create and retain IP and the other intangible assets that underlie, excuse me, the success of the most successful firms, and that are able to export their goods and services into global markets. So looking, across at Canada's economic performance, it's not great. Labor productivity has been completely stagnant since 2018. GDP per capita has been up only 3% in the last 11 years. And the economy has become a lot less complex since 2000, which is a measure basically of how hard it is to make our export basket. And it's a measure that's really strongly correlated with a country's level of wealth over time. We've got a nice slide a nice chart on the next slide to kind of show the turn of the century. We were pretty competitive. We looked like, quite competitive with South Korea. We were, behind the really heavy hitters like the US and Japan, but still quite strong. In that time, we've really become kind of a second-tier economy in terms of complexity. It means essentially that our exports have gotten less complex. So we're more reliant on natural resources, agriculture, than we were a generation ago, when our economy was more high-tech in terms of what we exported to the rest of the world. So we can go to the next slide. So why now? New threats and concerns. Obviously, we were writing this before the U.S. elections to some extent, so that has completely changed things in some ways. But even before that, the war in Ukraine, a new, more assertive and innovative China, COVID obviously was a huge disruption. So we're not short on big concerns and threats to our sovereignty and long-term economic prosperity. What does that mean? That means we have to redevelop some of the industrial and innovation capabilities that are going to guarantee our security and protect our standard of living in the long run. And the economic landscape has totally changed from a generation or two ago. IP and data present a totally new landscape, and our roles in global value chains will determine to what extent we're able to be a prosperous country in the future. So what does the sort of new economy look like? I mentioned that there's been a big generational change. One big change is the role of intangibles. So 90% of the S&P 500 value is intangibles, and it's not a perfect figure, but we're using it as a good rough indicator that you see a lot more of this tied up in patents, brands, trademarks, know-how. It's a big number, but we can kind of dive a little deeper into why that's important. I think our friend Kyle Briggs is here, and Kyle, I know, is not a huge fan of this figure, but I think it is at least useful in telling you something about the economy. Intangible assets have really been the basis of the knowledge-based economy. And we will show you some slides or some charts shortly, but there's been a really generational change as patent applications have absolutely spiked since the 90s. And you see also a rising share in profits, which means basically that the logic of industrial policy has really changed. Where before in the 70s, when we were sort of seeing the sputtering out of the kind of the post-war economy, you were basically competing away all the profits. Now there's a lot of rents kind of built in because intangible assets are so important, and we'll get to why that matters shortly. We can just take a look at the next slide just to kind of visualize, what does this really look like in terms of the economy changing? You can see the amount of patents has, basically tripled since the 90s. It really is a very, very profound shift. And then as well, Gabby, next slide, we'll see that the profit share of the economy has kind of been going up alongside that. So it's a very significant transformation of the economy. And we can go right to the next slide. So what does that look like now? So we've talked about, the knowledge-based economy, and now we're kind of in this data-driven economy where it's not just, people's skills, it's also things like data sets, the economies of scale through smartphones and social media, network effects that have basically made it so that in a lot of sectors, the winner really does take most when it comes to firms. And, we only have to look to FANG to GAFA to the Magnificent Seven. That number is not growing very fast, right? So superstar firms matter a lot. Where they are matters for their home countries. And you see a huge divergence. We talked about productivity. You see a huge divergence in productivity growth between leading edge and kind of lagging companies. So we'll have a chart of that in the next slide. So you looking at even manufacturing services doesn't matter. Your sort of leading edge firms are way, way, way more productive. It really does make a huge difference. So it's never been more important to be a place where those leading edge firms call home. So what's the kind of state of this? We had set federally a sort of target to double the number of high growth firms from 14,000 in 2017, but the number has basically not moved. It actually dipped in the interim, has kind of crawled its way back. So we're not in a great spot when it comes to this. A lot of people will tell you that FDI, foreign direct investment, and having the Googles and Amazons of the world open up more research shops in Canada is the key to that. It's not, and we've already seen a generation or two of that strategy not work. It's actually fascinating. There's a great paper that came out a year or two ago about Canada's patent productivity paradox. Where usually you see patents and productivity in an economy really closely track each other. Canada is the exception to this, and the reason is because we're the world's third largest exporter of inventors after China and India. So we're losing a lot of our top research talent, top management talent. It's a big problem, and it means that this isn't a solution on its own. We actually need to grow high growth firms here in Canada. So what does the policy mix for that mean? It doesn't mean that we need, smarter or smaller or bigger government. I think that's kind of beside the point. We need smarter policy. It means that we need to be getting more bang for our buck when it comes to the government policy and industrial policy. We've seen traditional approaches that are very heavily focused on tax credits and research funding not really bear fruit because they're not focused on domestic control of the kind of critical IP that companies need to scale, and on the high-level needs and blockers for innovators, which is access to talent, access to capital, access to customers, and having smart regulatory frameworks in place. So that's really where we're looking. Where can we use things like procurement, regulation, and new governance tools to do this more effectively? So that takes us to our recommendations, of which there are a lot, and we will not go through all of them because there are 34 across 14 ministerial mandates, so it would be here a long time. But we kind of distill that down to four big priorities. The first is, on the governance side. As I mentioned, we've had generations of innovation policy, industrial policy that have not really borne fruit in kind of precipitating the growth of high growth Canadian firms. We think having something like an innovation corporation or agency is an important part of that mix. I think taking some of the policy out of the hands of core government departments that are very constrained by policy and politics and often have a lot of very close ministerial oversight that kind of prevents them from taking a long view. We think that that's a wise way to proceed, and there's lots of ways we can kind of design that smartly. The other, big point on talent is that we have to recognize that we really are in a head-on competition with the United States at all times for the best and brightest, and we're losing. As I said, we're the third largest exporter of inventors in the world after China and India, countries that are much, much bigger than ours. And most of them are leaving to the US. So we need to recognize that we need to make Canada the best place in the world for those people to stay. And that means, being competitive on tax, being competitive on entrepreneurial talent, and really just recognizing that this is an existential challenge for us. The third big point is making innovation central to our defense, health, and security. And that means having the government of Canada be the world's best customer for homegrown innovators. Procurement is a place that we spent a lot of time on in the last year. People who've been here a couple times before for past CCI reports know that we did two big procurement innovation reports last year. This is obviously close to our hearts and is a really big opportunity to really get a lot more bang for our buck, both as taxpayers and citizens, and also as innovators. I think it can really be transformative. The fourth big sort of pillar of what we're looking at is looking at the traditional engines of prosperity in Canada. Natural resources, agriculture, energy. These are really big sectors that employ, hundreds of thousands of people across the country. I think millions if you take them all together. And we need to look at places, how can we support innovation there, right? Like I think these are competitive industries that add a lot of value, but there are places where we can do more, and we go into that a little more in the report. So I think that concludes the sort of run through, Gabby, unless there's another slide after this. Okay, we ran through all of this, so that's okay. That's my bad. So thanks everyone. So that's kind of the high level. I really would encourage you to dive directly into the report. There's a lot there. I think it is our most ambitious policy report ever. I think it's a thing we say every time we release a policy report, and has been true for the last little bit. And hopefully we keep on that curve. But there's a lot there, and I'd be happy to hear from folks separately as well if you want to shoot me an email after this session is done. And without further ado, I'll introduce our panel again, just to refresh everyone's memory. So Adrian Schauer is the founder and CEO of AlayaCare, and Dr. Karen Cross is the founder and CEO of Mimosa Diagnostics. I'll turn over to both of you, and we'll start with Karen, just to kind of introduce yourselves quickly and kind of just tell us really quickly the story of your company and why the CCI vision and a mandate to innovate kind of speak to you and what you're looking for from public policy.
Yep. So nice to meet everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. My background is I'm a plastic surgeon, PhD scientist, so I'm an academic surgeon. Really, Mimosa Diagnostics came out of a need I had in my practice, and really solving those big problems. So what do? We are a skin imaging platform. We look below the surface of the skin. We can see an injury before you see it with the naked eye. We are Health Canada approved and FDA cleared and commercial, mainly in the United States. So not so much here. And I put a thumbs up for me, I guess. We also, because we're a platform, have machine learning and data scientists data science behind what we do. And certainly it's not about the company, but excited to be here and talk a lot about the mandate to innovate. And I think coming from, as a physician, looking to procure technology to now being on the other side as industry to being procured, it's certainly been a full circle moment for me. And I'm really excited to sort of talk about some of my perspectives and again, align with the document that hopefully you all read or you will read.
Fantastic. So I'm Adrian Schauer. I'm the founder and CEO of AlayaCare. We're also a health tech company, but we're a software provider. So we're the operating system for home care delivery. Our customer is typically a private sector home care agency, but increasingly we've been helping public health authorities deliver care directly, but also assess and then outsource care to the private sector. My entrepreneurial journey goes back 20 years, even though AlayaCare is a 10-year-old company. And I was kind of right on stereotype for that previous era of Canadian tech entrepreneurship. Co-founded a mobile software business, which then ultimately broke into two. But we undercapitalized those businesses and took early exits. I mean, there were good outcomes, but we were kind of that first phase of Canadian tech entrepreneurship of building an innovation, commercializing it, but then ultimately, selling out to bigger fish. With AlayaCare, we have, I'm trying to build a 100-year plus company here. So trying to do it the new way, I would say. And, we've raised over 200 million of capital. Our cap table is proudly 91% Canadian. And we've scaled, we have just under 600 employees, 2/3 of which are in Canada. And we've scaled the business pretty well to date.
Thanks to both of you for joining us, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of share some of the nuts and bolts of exactly what you folks do and why you sort of honed in on CCI as an organization that you want to be part of and to help with our work. So one thing I wanted to ask you guys, you're both in the healthcare space, and obviously there procurement is kind of the name of the game. I'm curious from both of you, what do you see as parts of the system that are not working now, and what do you see as kind of some practical first steps we could start taking? Because this is a report that's very focused on the federal space, but I'm conscious that a lot of this, is also broadly applicable to governments across the country and even down to like the level of health authorities. So I'm curious to hear from both of you, what has and hasn't worked.
Yeah, I mean, I would say our experience selling into the public sector in Canada has been a long and frustrating one. I mean, finally, we're having success, but I would not describe the procurement processes as being very welcoming to younger growing companies. But even not maybe the last few months are an exception, but in general, not tilted towards local companies. So in healthcare, of course, primarily a provincial mandate. There are only a few pockets in veterans and prisons and Indigenous affairs where the federal government has any procurement authority. So for us, it's really been about selling to provincial public health authorities. And they are very uncoordinated. There are different challenges in different provinces. I want to give kudos to Can Health for the initiative. We're Can Health members. We found some utility more so in the Maritimes than in other places. Like I think it's a step in the right direction to say you can have one provincial health authority validate a solution, which then can get procured by others. But in general, my experience with public sector is that there has not been a lot of risk appetite. The traditional procurement process is not oriented towards here's a solution or here's a problem I have to solve. What are the solutions out there? It's very much kind of in the box, rigid RFPs. And then even when we succeed in convincing our prospective buyer that we're the solution they want and there's ROI to procure, either they're blocked or there's a very formal process that if we're underbid by $1, that low bidder gets the deal regardless of the long-term potential for the partnership. So that's been my experience so far.
Thanks, Adrian. And
Yeah.
Karen, I hear from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been pretty open and public about procurement problems in healthcare. So, everything, you've said, I absolutely agree with. And I think there's sort of three things if we're going to cluster around what are those roadblocks that we see. And again, getting back to that sort of full circle, it's at the beginning. So when we first started this innovation at the university, coming out of a health authority where, we're translating knowledge from the lab into the clinical environment, solving real clinical problems. It really starts with the culture of innovation at the level of the healthcare system or the university. So industry is bad, healthcare is good, and you have this dichotomy that we have to break down. And I gave the analogy at Stanford. So if you're a medical student at Stanford, you have to have a commercialization project as part of every quarter. How are you going to solve this cardiology problem? How are you going to solve this respiratory problem to get credits? And it's also valued. If you become on staff there, they want your commercialization plan. So it's not just how good you are as a technical person or an academic, it's what are you going to commercialize and how are you going to benefit society? So I think it sort of starts there. Then it's, who comes around you at the beginning to kind of help you. Like I have no business background, but I have stepped out of my career, to see Mimosa be successful. And so then you get into procurement. And I think, if we break down procurement into one, there's no transparent pathway. So we're a medical device company with a software component and AI. We cross all of the pathways that are barriers to procuring into the hospital system. So the first is a transparent pathway. What is the path to procurement? How is it laid out? What are the criteria you need to meet? So for example, as a small company looking at a health authority, if you don't meet their cybersecurity requirements, and whether they're advanced or not, you might as well just stop because it's not going to work. But you don't know that until you start the process. So now you've wasted maybe a lot of time, engagement, et cetera, which you could have been resourced to people who are willing to accept maybe the certifications you have at this time. And So I think just having some more transparency in what is the pathway, but not only that, in young companies that we're trying to develop, the health system has to understand we are not the big global multinationals. We don't have a team of people that's going to push this through. Facilitate some help. You're a Canadian innovative company. Let's help you navigate this pathway back to Can Health. Like, great initiative. But they struggle with the same things that I'm saying is that what's the pathway here? Wait, we didn't understand this was going to be a barrier. And then all of a sudden the barrier pops up. So I think it's really important, one, that there's transparency. Two, we have something internal. And I have my final piece, which is about the financials. So you might get through a procurement pathway and they're like, wait, hold it. We don't have a budget. We got to push this off to next year. So then we get into budgeting problems. And I have lots to say about that piece because it's a really critical part of what drives the procurement pathway as well. And again, it's not to be disparaging against the health system. They've got to pay for it. But I think who pays is a big part of that as well.
Yeah, that's really excellent, and I kind of want to pick up on a theme I think I've really heard here, which is the role of kind of friction in being a barrier here. And one thing that we've had a big part of the national dialogue for the last couple of weeks and months has been interprovincial trade barriers. And turning 13 economies into one, and I think that's a really laudable objective. It's in the report, but one piece that we pointed to as a place to go even bigger on this is to say, how can we actually integrate procurement into more of a single market in Canada? Because, as you say, you're dealing with different challenges, different health authorities, different provinces all over the country. What are the ways that we could kind of streamline that and really have more of a national unified public market? And this isn't just healthcare, right? I think there's lots of opportunities. We talk a little bit about carbon removal and some other opportunities in the report. But there's lots of public problems that are hard to solve, and that's why it's government's job to solve them. And there's, our thinking is procurement can create markets for solving these problems, and markets are really good at solving tangible problems for which, there's a prize at the other end, right? So, really thinking through how can we kind of go beyond just interprovincial trade barriers, which we all agree, like let's start taking them down. That's great. But how can we go even bigger on this and really think about, building markets for public purposes, including healthcare, including defense, including the environment. There's lots of places where there are just hard public problems that we haven't been able to crack the old way. So let's think about doing it a new way. It's been really a theme for us in putting this report together. So this is great to hear that you guys have kind of encountered that in your careers. Adrian, I see.
Yeah.
Are you?
I just want to also give credit to a federal initiative out of Health Canada to push proactively interoperability standards. HL7 Fire kind of emerging as the international standard, now being forced as the Canadian standard. I think regardless of whether it helps AlayaCare sell software, if we're procuring on international standards as a country, we'll get the best possible solutions, not be pigeonholed. But for us, having to build different interop standards for different provinces, that's just no value add overhead to our business. So anything that we can do to have national standards, but then as much as possible aligned with international standards, I'm super supportive of. So I think there are probably many examples of that. But that's a non-dollar, like a non-monetary thing the federal government can do. And just to your point on how important procurement is, if there's a dollar that goes to a Canadian innovator, right, startup, scale up, whatever it is, that dollar is a purchase. I can turn that, I can raise money on my growing top line. I can turn that into $10 of equity to help grow my business. A dollar of investment is a dollar of investment that I can invest. A dollar of procurement can be $10 of investment. So I think, to the extent we can make that message heard and felt in the innovation agenda at the government level, that's really number one on my list of what we'd like.
Karen, did you want to hop in on this, or we can hop to standards?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. And again, our technology came out of the University and Academic Health Center, but yet this health center has no capacity to purchase this technology yet. They were part of the process, invested in it in the back end on the cap table, but can't buy. So it's back to what I said at the beginning, like you've got to complete the circle, right? We got to have standards, we got to have transparency across the country, but we also have to say, okay, how do we complete the cycle? And why can't that organization who wants to buy technology, they can't do it? So yeah, with lots of challenges, but they're all solvable.
Yeah. So Adrian, you brought up standards, and both of you brought them up, and I think this is a really important piece to do. And I think our comms guy James McLeod is probably laughing at me right now because we've talked about procurement and standards, my two favorite things. But so one thing we call for in this report, and it's been kind of something that's been percolating for a long time, and I want to credit our friends at CG for kind of sort of incubating this. But one piece that we hear a lot about is regulation is really it's very hard, right? Like you can't, there's no room, there's no scope to change things, or it's very hard to change things. Just it's a weighty process for government to even keep these things up to date. So we've talked a lot about what can standards do here, and this is a very in the weeds kind of change. But one thing we call for in this is to recognize standards as kind of an equivalent layer of governance compared to regulation, right? You can basically say in a bill, the minister can recognize standards that we'll sort of consider equivalent to the sort of regulatory compliance piece. Would that be a game changer for you guys who are kind of working in these heavily regulated, standards-driven spaces?
I'm going to be maybe less categorically yes than I see. It would be helpful. It would not be game changing for us. Yeah.
And Karen,
I think just taking it step back from procurement and just looking at regulatory bodies. So it's a class 2 medical device. Some of the things we'll do in the future are class 3. Health Canada doesn't get us a lot because it's not accepted anywhere else in the world, right? So when we made those changes where, we elected to go to the United States for other reasons, but also because we knew that clearance at the FDA was going to be faster, easier, and less expensive with more upside, but it would be accepted in many other countries all over the world, that we could easily get through a regulatory pathway. So we have done ourselves a little bit of a disservice by having this part. And the other piece is that, if you have an international certification around safety or electrical safety, but you were still required to get a CSA certification on top of your electrical safety certifications, this is not helpful, right? It's an expense. Again, back to the checklist and transparency. You're going to make a decision as a young company to say, sorry, this is not worth the $80,000 or $100,000 I'm going to spend that a large multinational global corporation is going to be able to spend to get that certification. And I'm going to go to the US where it doesn't matter. Or I'm going to go to India where, they don't need the certification. They'll accept my international certification. So I think we've done ourselves a disservice. If regulations need to be there, I'm not countering that part, but let's actually look to say, okay, what would we accept that is outside our own country as acceptable in the procurement pathway? And we've had a lot of barriers in Canada where it was just shut down right from the door. Sorry, you don't have CSA. We're not going to talk to you. Like, wait, I have an international ISO certification that has our products at the Cleveland Clinic. How is it possible that a small hospital in Canada, it doesn't see that certification? So definitely challenging. But again, back to what Adrian was saying, if you have standards or even just this is our guidance document on what's acceptable, it helps these organizations because in all fairness, again, sitting on the other side sometimes in the healthcare system, they are very overwhelmed. Yeah. And if they had a guidance document, say, okay, hey, this is our provincial or federal guidance document and we're following this guidance. So I think it would help them a lot too, not just us.
Yeah, that's really useful. Karen, one thing you brought up is the kind of role of universities in the innovation ecosystem, and you pointed to kind of how Stanford, for instance, does things really differently. What's I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience working with post-secondary in Canada, both at kind of the level of is that where you're looking for talent, and also in terms of partnering on research, is that a thing you're looking at, and what's been your experience in that space?
We have a lot of smart people here. We are like very capable group of people. And again, have a lot of strength. So in the space that I'm in, which would be wound care and portable medical devices, some of the biggest countries that are changing the imaging sector are Canadian. In fact, almost everyone changing the space is Canadian, but I bet you nobody knows about that. That's here on the call because again, we're south of the border and selling south of the border. So I believe there's a lot of talent here. It's just how do you find the talent and how do you retain the talent? I think also when you come up with novel, innovative solutions that are coming out of these institutions, what happens in the beginning is maybe that tech transfer officer that comes around you in the beginning doesn't look at the final play or what is the final outcome. And maybe you're not quite set up at the beginning for success. So we have some work to do as we think to these tech transfer offices that go around companies and innovative people like, you know, like myself. Like there was multiple things that we were creating. My co-founder 4 or 5 times, you know, he's been in this community inventing things. You know, I think some work can be done there, and getting, again, bringing people who've commercialized tech before, bring them into this sector, maybe standardize a little bit about what a tech transfer office looks like, but also enable that tech transfer office to, again, come back in a full circle moment, and I'm going to use that word full circle a lot, to repurchase. So they're all waiting for the royalties, they're all waiting for their exit, but is there a chance for them to start to invest, you know, by purchasing and helping as they go? So it's kind of like you invent something, you know, you get your signature of either your IP back or you don't. But a lot of the way things are set up at the beginning, it doesn't set you up for investment success. It doesn't set you up for commercial success. And that part, you know, we really need to look at that as a country. Who's doing it well and what can we learn? But also, there are groups south of the border that do this extremely well and have been able to fund their hospitals, their universities, based on some of this. So I think there's a call up to action there, and we could do better.
Yeah, Singapore, right? There are lots of jurisdictions that do this well. I was involved as an angel investor in a medical device company that spun out of U of T, and I was negotiating with the tech transfer office there. I was happy to discover there was such a thing as a tech transfer office, but it was not a very, it was a tough experience, to be honest.
Yeah, that's useful to hear, and this is something won't surprise people to hear. We do address in the mandate to innovate. We do have some stuff on there on perhaps where the federal government can go on tech transfer. But once again, you know, this is to some extent a provincial issue, and we'd love to see, you know, provincial governments engaging on how we can kind of all row in the same direction on this. Because certainly something I've heard from innovators, you know, like yourselves, is that it's hard to even just get a sense of the landscape, right? Like every university does things differently. You know, every province does things differently. So having a little bit more of an understanding across the board of like, this is how this works. I think a place where, you know, coordination and, you know, not necessarily, you know, forcing everyone into line, but at least, you know, finding some points of agreement and minimums that we can all kind of go by would be a step up. So a little bit of a left field question for both of you, but you know, obviously this has been a very turbulent couple of years kind of post-COVID. So I guess I'm curious to hear from both of you. What's a pinch point around, you know, probably around policy, but if you want to go wider than that, please feel free to do so. That's really surprised you in the last 5 years or so.
Maybe I can take that question just in something that's changed. You know, pre-COVID, where, you know, co-located work was really the model. The access to talent, you know, vector of CCI's work was very top of mind, right? I mean, there were just a huge shortage of software developers in Canada, and we sponsored lots of immigrants and had a great experience there. But there was a lot of sand in the gears. That problem got kind of solved, or mostly solved, but just in time for that whole consideration to change. So I don't have access to talent with a geographic lens anymore. You know, if there's a great executive that's in the US that I want to have join my company, I mean, I just hire them and I don't worry about it. If I need a great general manager over my, you know, Australia, New Zealand business, it's fine. I just hire them, right? So with respect to how Canada looks at immigration, I think the way you've worded in your policy document is exactly right. What we really need to focus on importing, quote unquote, is the entrepreneurs, right? That's where you start your business. That's where it's going to be incorporated. It's probably where the IP is going to reside. It's where your long-term profits are going to live. I think this was a surprise for me as a consideration in this new era. And I think Canada hasn't made fully that pivot to say what we need to attract to Canada is entrepreneurs.
If I can jump in with a metaphor, kind of picking up on that, you know, if we're looking at this as the Stanley Cup playoffs are currently going on right now, you know, if you're going to make a cup run that year, you're not going to start trading for draft picks, right? Which I think is sometimes what we're talking about when we're saying bringing great researchers, which is great. Those folks are fantastic prospects, and I think they obviously add a lot to Canada. But what you want is actually someone who you can bring into that lineup day one, right? And who's going to make a difference, who's going to be a veteran. So I think that's maybe a good sort of metaphor to think about this when we're thinking about how can we sort of bring in more entrepreneurs. And frankly, people talk about the missing province, right? There's about 1 million Canadians who live abroad, probably more now. I think that number might be a little old. Most of them in the U.S. The U.S. is not, as stable a country as it was even a couple of years ago. So, I think really thinking about how can, governments across the country think about repatriating folks who have built careers in the U.S. and thinking maybe this is the time to come home. And I think there's scope for a lot of creativity there on bringing back people who've learned a lot from their experience in the U.S. and have a lot to contribute to Canada. So that's something I think we're keen on exploring as we kind of go into this new session of Parliament and beyond. So Karen, happy to hear from you on this question as well.
Yeah, it's really just to build, and I don't think, Adrian, I love everything you're saying, so it's all good. Someone put it in the chat, and it's culture, and the world just changed a lot, right? And initially I was going to answer this question with tariffs because I think about tariffs all the time, but
Yeah.
I think also culture is important if we're talking about bringing people. For example, there are a lot of new people to Canada, but maybe English isn't the first language. So how do you get around that? And they maybe, people might not hire right away, but by using AI or other large language modules, sorry, you can find a way to have them integrate and communicate and be comfortable, because a lot of it's about their confidence and comfort level. And I think, when there's a lot of talent here. I've always said there's a lot of talent sometimes driving the taxi cab, and if you actually have that conversation, you realize, wait a minute, you did what in the Ukraine? And you can find people, and it doesn't always have to be with search firms or LinkedIn. But what I really wanted to say was about our culture. And I think right now, being Canadian has never been more important, but it also what is being Canadian represents. And I spend a lot of time in the United States, like every single week I'm in a different American city. And I can tell you that what we have is very unique, and it can bring people here. Even for our product, the people who have aligned around Mimosa, they call themselves the Friends of Mimosa. They say, we are the Mimosa community. They want to see you win. There's this whole momentum that's happening. And I think we have a real chance with who we are as inherent people, as Canadians, but also the types of companies we're building. I mean, Canadian companies are different, and that can be very attractive, especially as we think to this next generation of young talent. They want something different, and we have it. And we haven't done, I don't think, a good enough job at really promoting about being uniquely Canadian and how it's great to be part of something that is not just a company, but like a movement. And maybe I got on my soapbox a little bit there, but I found Adrian got it started. So
No, not a bit. That's really, I think
yeah,
that's really, I think we all in this room agree that, building in Canada is something worthwhile because there's something worthwhile about Canada that makes it worth doing it here, right? Like it's a bit of a circle, but that we're here because we're here and we believe that that's the best place to be. And I think being more forthright about that and just saying like, actually, yeah, this is the best place to do this. And like, if we can make it even better, right? And I think that's very much the heart of what drives us, and in service to our members and to changing public policy, is really a belief that it's worth doing this. That there is so much in Canada that we can build on and make even better. So yeah, no, I think that does need to be said, and I think that's exactly right, Karen. I actually, so you brought up tariffs. I would actually love to hear from you on what that's been like in the last month or two. Well, even I guess we're in May now already, so last couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, you're having multiple conversations with your team just to say, listen, like this is chaos, and we're going to ride this roller coaster, but you got to stay calm, and you've got to see how this plays out. And at the same time, you don't want to move your manufacturing, especially in a young company, like investing in manufacturing. It took a long time to get this right for us with what we have. Again, Canada, a lot of expertise in portable medical technology. So, why put that south of the border? So firstly, it's just dealing with the chaos internally of your own team, thinking the world is over initially, because that's what it felt like. And then realizing, wait, this is just another roadblock. We are a solutions-based company. Let's figure out the path forward. And the third thing is, how do you protect that IP and keep it local? like how do you maintain the core of your asset, your technical asset, and your data asset here in Canada? And, going through those pieces, we aligned as a company and said, we will keep our IP here. We'll keep the core asset of our manufacturing here for as long as we can. And everyone felt that the pressure, and they even feel the pressure now. And so coming up with some innovative ways, maybe to get this thing across the border without such a big ding, because we do have a device and it is tariffable, and we did get a couple big bills at the beginning, but then just trying to find novel ways, and then also partners south of the border that just see what's going on and are willing to step up and say, like, how can we help? Again, very fortunate to find those people who, again, want to see Canadians win, back to how we can use how we are to have other people help us. So it might have been a bit high level, but I mean, it will continue, right? Like you've had multiple conversations here at CCI with the membership around tariffs and, how to navigate. And I don't think anyone knows the right path. You've just got to try to find a path and stick with it, but be agile enough to change it if it's not working.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, from our point of view, we sell software as a service, and so as it stands today, touch wood, the tariff talk's been all around goods, not services. So I have not been that concerned. We sell into the States out of a U.S. subsidiary, right? We do transfer pricing for the IP at the end of the year. Even if the tariff lens shifted to services, I sort of felt like I could just allow, profits to accumulate in the US sub until there's a new administration and see what happens. But yeah, I think I get concerned when I hear Trump talk about the digital services tax, because now you're into services and IP residency. And I would just sort of advise the government to make a little concession. We don't need our few percent off of Google and Facebook if it's going to risk all of the cross-border IP-based services we sell into that largest market in the world. So that would be my point on tariffs, but otherwise we've been quite untouched.
There was an interesting, I don't even really know what to call it, I guess a policy announcement, question mark, about tariffing foreign films the other day. So I think they're thinking about tariffing services in some way. So it'll be an interesting road. So by the way, I'll just, for folks, please feel free to toss in questions. I see a couple. In fact, one I want to pick up on is I see Monique has asked about, talked about mining as a place where we can sort of, we have opportunities to become more innovative in kind of a traditional sector. And I kind of wanted to pick this up because she's asked, are there other sectors that we could draw upon for near-term commercialization wins? One that we talk about in the document is agriculture. This has historically been a place where Canada has done really well, and actually where we've been extremely innovative. Obviously, canola, the first three letters of that can give you a hint as to where that's from. And I think this is a sector that's changing. I was listening to a podcast last week that I think there's a very substantial, I think it was 90 million malnourished people in the world, which is a pretty big number. It could, apologies, this is kind of me off the cuff here if I've gotten the number wrong, but I remember being like, wow, that's a big number. Feeding the world is a big task, and once again, we were talking earlier about what are places where the public sector can kind of craft a market to solve big problems. And I think how can we kind of feed the world is a challenge Canada can set itself. And it's a place where we have all of the ingredients to be the world's biggest food superpower, tons of water, tons of land, educated people. Like we really have all the ingredients, and obviously we are already very strong in this space. But I do think thinking near term, like what are the opportunities here to do even more, could be really, really impactful for Canada. I'm curious, Karen and Adrian, just looking across, beyond health, if you guys see other places where you're very excited or energized by innovation that's going on.
Look, from a policy perspective, I think the big opportunity is to use our kind of natural resource gift to force more of the value add to happen here. It's true in energy, right? I don't want to send my Quebec electricity to a data center in upstate New York. I want the data center here. Same in ag, Same in mining and oil and gas. So I think that would be a real thing we could do from a policy perspective, is just use the natural resources we have to try and get more of the value-added services on top of those resources to happen in Canada. So I'm sure there are policy complexities there. I can't, I'm not the right person to think about, but that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think for me, not so much answering the question around the policy, but I'm from Newfoundland, so I'm going to use a pun. Generally, I am generally very funny, but I'm being very conservative today. But with cross-pollination, so for example, in looking at the health space, there are technologies available in health that might apply into other areas, like fish and fish bacteria. For example, there is tech in this space that could help a lot in our fish industry. So again, the federal government sees all of this and may be able to see how things could cross-pollinate. So we are some of the largest exporters of fish. What if tech could come over and align with fish? Like, it's about looking at that big picture. And again, I'm just spitballing here. The second thing I'll say, because I think it's really important, but data is king. You have to measure, for health data, there's other things in that data that are important to, big, large groups. And I think it's important to say also that data is king, and it doesn't have to be health data. It can be financial data, it can be other things, but in the knowledge economy, the more robust you have on that back end, we'll be able to win in that global market because people are looking for data.
Yeah, super good point. Yeah, you mentioned the ocean economy, like this is a place as well. Like, we have functionally 3 coasts. It's there's a lot there that we can do. I think once again, this is not a failure of people's innovativeness and entrepreneurialism. It's a thinking big about where we can kind of go from a public policy perspective to kind of look at what are our big challenges and craft some policy around whether it's creating markets, whether it's getting a better regulatory mix. There's just big opportunities kind of wherever we look. I've seen a couple of questions about defense, and that is a place where we go in the report. So happy to kind of touch on that. Obviously, there's going to be a ramp up in defense spending, right? Like, we are getting to 2%. We're probably going to exceed 2% within a decade. So I think it's thinking, what can we do with that, right? And thinking what's the biggest place where we can kind of invest in places that are dual use. So we're not just, building a tank and putting it in a warehouse, but also thinking about how are we kind of creating new markets, new companies that are able to compete abroad. This is, you look at the history of the US defense industry, this is very much what's driven a lot of American success in computing and aviation. Silicon Valley really is downstream from both of those things. The Southern California, aircraft, and then as well as semiconductors really coming out of the Defense Department. So I think thinking really big about what are the places, and I think we have a really, really interesting cluster in Canada of cybersecurity companies. We think that's a huge opportunity. Drones as well. We have a really big country, as people no doubt are aware. And where can we kind of add value on unmanned vehicles of various kinds, whether that's flying or in the water. This is a place where I think there are real opportunities to both meet our defense needs and find commercial opportunities really across the world. So definitely very interested in that. And I would say on any of this as well, like, the conversation is very much open. If you'd like to follow up on any of this, please feel free to give me a shout. I'll drop my email in here kind of at the end of this conversation. So folks, don't feel shy. Yeah, I guess go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to say one thing, and back to cross-pollination. The health tech industry can also have application in the military. So whether it's like active military or it's in veterans. So, one of the things I'd say too is that it's not just about the equipment that they need, it's also the health services that we need to keep them on their feet, or maybe, battlefield triage. And the second piece is, you're right, that in the US, I, on almost every month, am approached by someone from the US military who wants to offer me a grant to do XYZ. I've never, ever talked to anybody in the Canadian military because, again, it's connections, it's pathways, it's how do you get there? So they have really set themselves up for success in how they grant and buy, but also looked at not just the equipment needed to be an Army or a Navy, et cetera, but the other things that need to go around both active military personnel and veterans. So again, just it's really about that cross-pollination, again, using our current channels to support the young companies that are coming up in this country.
Yeah, I think there's a cultural aspect to this one as well. If I were to do a new startup today, I would definitely be tempted to do something in defense, but just culturally, I could only imagine doing something that's like quite defensive, not offensive in nature, just for the dinner party effect of it. So I think also that's something Canada's going to have to address culturally.
Sure. So I know, just I'm looking at where we're at on time here. I'd love to kind of hear from both of you. Like we have a new government in place now, or like we'll have the full cabinet next week. This is a question I was asking a lot of folks when we were putting the report together. Of if you had, 20 odd minutes, you don't need to take 20 minutes, but if you had 20 odd minutes with a new prime minister, what would you want them to know about being an innovator in Canada, and where would you want them to kind of concentrate their energy?
Well, I'll rehash a line. I had a dinner with Mark Carney in October, November when he was still just a prospective candidate. Um, a lot of it's been said, but one thing I think that a point I made, which I think could be picked up on, is the whole narrative around innovators and wealth creators in Canada could change to everyone's benefit. So, speaking for myself, I'm a happy taxpayer. Okay. But the the class warfare that was kind of started under Trudeau Liberals talking about, pay your fair share, et cetera, I think was unnecessary and destructive. Like, especially after a certain level of wealth, like people should be happy about and lauded for putting the chips back on the table for others to have opportunities. And a simple kind of change of how we talk about that. Thank you to the wealth creators, your thank you for the tax contribution. And that has to be paired with some level of caring about the efficiency of government service delivery, right? Which now is in the water, maybe wasn't at the time. I think those two things can have a really positive shift. Because if we're going to encourage, like, talent is mobile, capital is mobile. If we want Canada to be a destination where entrepreneurs build world-beating tech companies, it has to feel welcoming. And I think the celebrating of success that happens in the US, that sometimes does not happen in Canada, I think there could be a top-down narrative change that would be very helpful, not only in attracting people here, but convincing existing Canadian entrepreneurs not to be tempted to, pick up their pail and go play in another sandbox.
Karen, did you want to pick
Yeah,
up
that's
as well?
hard to follow. Maybe I'll just say two words because that was pretty articulate. I would say invest, in the word invest and promote. And not just promote within our own country, promote outside. And we have a real opportunity right now to change this story. We're at an inflection point, and again, you need to invest in your local currency, which is your people, your talent, and your innovation. So I'll leave it there because I thought Adrian did a great job with that.
Yeah, on that point too, I think it's really worth saying that, it's not just about people who, been here a long time. We really are losing young people kind of by the day, right? If you look at, there was a report done in 2018, and so I just caution that like these numbers are slightly old now, but I don't know that the dynamics have shifted enough that I'm that worried about it. That, out of a class of however many people, it was 80% of the software engineering class had gone to the US, right? Like that's a lot of people. That's really a lot of folks who have taken other opportunities, and obviously good for them to some extent, but I think we should look at that as a policy problem, frankly, for Canada for the long run, is if we're losing people, to that scale with in-demand skills who are, entrepreneurial and want to make big changes, then it's that's tough. That makes it harder for us to become, to build the wealth and prosperity that we need to pay for the social programs we care about and need, and to have the kind of scope to respond to challenges like what's going on with the US right now, right? I think we'd feel a lot better if, our productivity growth hadn't completely stalled out in 2018 about dealing with these big challenges of reorienting our economy right now. We'd have more flexibility. We'd have, effectively more sovereignty, more control over our own destinies as Canadians. And that's why, this really matters, and why it's important to this to be a place where entrepreneurs and firms can grow and lead the world, because otherwise we are going to be, we're going to wake up and find ourselves, kind of a colony of the US, to the extent that, that's not already the case. This is a long-standing problem, and it's not going to be fixed overnight, but, recognizing the problem and treating it as one, I think is very much the first step to becoming a more prosperous and sovereign Canada. I'm conscious of time, and conscious that that was also a good place to end the conversation. I know there's some questions in the chat we haven't quite got to, and I will just drop my email here if you'd like to follow up. I'm always happy to chat. This report really would not have been possible without the input and contributions of a lot of people across the country, both in and out of the CCI membership base. So really delighted to hear from folks on an ongoing basis. Like, we're very aware that, like I said, we've got a new government coming in, really next week, and a parliament coming back at the end of the month. So this is very much the start of a series of conversations and at the end. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming here today. I'd especially like to thank Adrian and Karen for lending their expertise and really excellent contributions to this conversation. So tremendously appreciated, as well as to the rest of my CCI team. And I see a lot of members. I see James from Edmonton here, and many others in the chat. So I'm always delighted to see a lot of folks come out for these webinars, and hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. Please do read the report. There's a lot there. I'm excited to see the impact it's going to have down the road, and yeah, really looking forward to continuing this conversation, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Laurent. Thanks, CCI.
Okay. Thank you.